Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. That was well done.
For those of you who have been here before, you may notice that the room looks a little bit different tonight, and that's because we have a special service. Last spring, our congregation took a pilgrimage to the South on a civil rights journey, and tonight we get to have an opportunity to get a taste of what that was like, to be able to hear some of the reflections, some of the things that we learned from that experience, to see some of the things that we saw. For those of you for whom this is your first time with us, welcome. Bruchim Habayim, welcome to celebrate the Shabbat with us. Our service is a participatory one, and everyone is invited to join with us, to sing with us, to read with us. The prayer books should be right underneath your seats or in front of the seats in front of you. So let's take a moment to just take a breath. Shabbat is a cathedral in time. It is time and space that is set apart from the ordinary. We cross over a spiritual bridge from the everyday world into the peace of Shabbat. But sometimes it's not so easy to just run across that bridge. So we take a moment, just close our eyes, allow ourselves to shake away whatever stress we may have had this week, and just think about the day to come. Think about the peace of Shabbat, where we allow ourselves to turn off the world around us, to focus on a sense of gratitude, a sense of praise, giving thanks for all the blessings that are around us that too often during the week we just run by. On Shabbat, we're reminded that we are partners with God, creating and recreating the world every single week. But how should we recreate that world? We should recreate it with love, with compassion, and with justice.
Olam chesed yibaneh, Adonai, Olam chesed yibaneh, Adonai, Olam chesed yibaneh. I will build this world from love, and you must build this world from love, and if we build this world from love, then God will build this world from love. Olam chesed yibaneh, Olam chesed yibaneh.
We learn from the book of Exodus that every journey needs a good leader, someone who knows what direction we're supposed to go in, and God willing, somebody who knows that the journey shouldn't take 40 years. And so it's my pleasure to invite up Judy Hyman, who was our leader on this journey.
Good evening, Shabbat Shalom. I'm so happy to be together for this special Shabbat. I'm Judy Hyman. I'm a board member and chair of our Racial Justice Committee, and I had the privilege of helping to organize and lead the Civil Rights Tour. More than 3 years ago, Rabbi Alfie suggested that we plan such a tour for the congregation. Several people jumped on board. Please be sure to see the handout, the flyer, where we recognize the many people who were instrumental in helping to shape the trip and in planning this service. I'd like to give a special shout out to Dorothy and Brian Landsberg, our own real-life heroes of the civil rights movement from the early 1960s to the present. They were very much a part of the inspiration and preparation for the tour, and though unable to be there with us, except occasionally through the wonders of technology, they were very much at the heart and soul of the trip. I'd also like to thank Martha Moon, my incomparable partner in all things, including this extraordinary tour. From the beginning, our purpose in offering this trip was clear. We wanted to learn together as a congregation about the American history that shapes all of us and that's reflected in the ongoing civil rights issues we confront today. We wanted to gain additional inspiration and strategies to keep working for racial equity here at home. We felt it was especially important for us to educate ourselves beforehand. We set out to study civil rights history and contemporary racial issues. And perhaps most importantly, we looked at the ideology of white supremacy and the resulting social structures that support and enable ongoing racial inequity and how we can work to dismantle them. We held many book and film discussions for the congregation and had several guest speakers. You can find our reading and viewing recommendations on that flyer and a link to them, and recordings of some of our educational programs are also posted online. After 2 years of COVID delay, this past May, 39 members of our congregation traveled together to see and experience important landmarks of the civil rights movement. We met veterans of the movement, visited neighborhoods, museums, and monuments, and joined a Shabbat service at a shul in Montgomery, Alabama. It was a lot of information to take in over 5 days, and even more challenging were the many emotions for us to process. To generalize just a little bit, as a people, Jews tend to be more comfortable on the cerebral plane than with our feelings, especially very painful ones. It's a survival strategy. But as our group discussed at the beginning of our journey, for this trip to be truly transformational, we needed to connect to our hearts as well as our heads. So we encouraged participants to be fully present and make room for their emotions as we move through our experiences. And I encourage you to do the same this evening, allowing yourself to feel the sadness, discomfort, and other feelings that may come with some of what you see and hear. Would all the tour participants who are here please stand? And if you're online, please give us a hineni, a here I am, in the chat. Tonight you'll hear from a few of these folks as they share their reflections throughout the service. Please see the Shabbat flyer for their names, and all of us will be happy to talk with you afterwards at the Oneg. Thank you. For me, and I think for many of us, the Civil Rights Tour was a pilgrimage, a sacred journey. Behind you, you have some of the stops on our way. Please take a moment to walk through them at your own pace after the service. I felt that many of the places we visited were hallowed ground, and the people we met with and learned about were God's partners in trying to repair, to perfect this work in progress. We invite you to join us in singing and praying together tonight and in continuing the work of repair moving forward. Thank you, and Shabbat Shalom.
Before we continue with the service, let's take a little time to introduce ourselves to each other. And tonight, I'm going to actually give you a question to pose to each other. And that's, what do you think of when you hear the phrase civil rights? Don't be shy. You could get up, introduce yourselves to someone you didn't know when you come in, and have a little chat. I love all the sounds of everyone talking, and I hope we continue the conversation during the oneg after the service. But for now, we have greetings from Israel. Two of our participants have returned home to Cholon, but they have a message to share with us tonight. So I'm going to invite everyone to look to the walls.
Shabbat Shalom everyone. It's Hodaya and Adar and we are back in Israel, but we would like to share with you tonight our thoughts and about our civil rights tour in the South last year.
So one of the things that was very powerful for me about the civil rights movement in the South was that the essence of the movement was very religious, and it was all based on the idea that all men were created equal, so they should be treated the same way, and all of the leaders and the activists had religious background, and all the activities were based on the community that the religion and the churches created. And this is why it was so strong and so powerful, because it was all built on the religious community.
And I would like to add to that not only that I felt that I learned so much about the civil rights movement and all the facts and all the places and meeting the people and seeing in my own eyes where it happened. So I was so impressed by the fact that for you, for us, for all the CBI congregants that have been to this tour, this was a kind of a pilgrimage tour or a religious tour, meaning that for us going there was part of being Jews and part of being Reformed Jews and part of being religious Jews. And this is very, very powerful for me, because in Israel usually people wouldn't think even that studying about civil rights movement has anything to do with religion, and especially with the Jewish religion, and it would be considered only as like a universal issue or a philosophical matter or a social matter or something like that. And here I really felt throughout our journey there, and with the praise we had with Rabbi Alfie and the feeling that we shared, that this was for us part of being Jews, and this was very, very impressive for me. Anything else for that?
No, I hope you all enjoyed with us as much as we enjoyed with you, and we miss you, and Shabbat Shalom.
Yeah, regards from all the Kohen-Kalems.
What a lovely treat for all of us. Now the Sabbath Queen is knocking on the doors. She's asking if she could come in. So let's welcome her with Lecha Dodi on page 138. Lecha Dodi,
Likrat kala, likrat kala, penei Shabbat nekabla, nekabla. Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom umevorach. Ohi v'shalom ater bala gam besimcha utzola toch emunei am segula boi chala Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom umevorach.
Tonight is also a special Shabbat because on this Shabbat we get to celebrate one of the youth in our congregation becoming a bat mitzvah. For Cantor and I, it feels like yesterday that she was a newborn being wheeled around on this campus. And it is really a joy to be able to be part of this celebration with her family. So in honor of Brooklyn being called to the Torah on this Shabbat, I'd like to invite her and her parents, John and Allison, and our brothers, Kyle and Miles, to join us on the bima to do us the honor of lighting the Shabbat candles. The blessing for the candles will be on page 120, but first we continue with Shalom Aleichem on page 142.
Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon, Melech, Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Bokem L'Shalom, Malachei Hashalom, HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu l'hadlik ner shel Shabbat. As these Shabbat candles give light to all who behold them, so may we, by our lives, give light to all who behold us. As their brightness reminds us of the generations of Israel who have kindled light, so may we, in our own day, be among those who kindle light.
Barchuni l'shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Melech, Malachei Amlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Seichem v'shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Melech, Malachei Amlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Throughout the Torah, we hear God calling out to different individuals, and their response is always, Hineni, I am here. The relationship with God is one in which there is a dialogue, so much so that we begin our services with what we call the call to worship, where the cantor calls out to us to make sure that we're ready for what we are about to undertake. Because even if it's a spiritual, especially if it's a spiritual journey, you need to be prepared in order to do it, just as we prepared for our journey through the South. And so we have some special reflections, both in person and recorded, from members of our journey to talk about what it means to be called to do something.
When I heard about the trip, I was thrilled. My husband and I are educators, and we've been teaching our students about diversity and the abuse so many cultures endure. The opportunity to go would be wonderful, but we were on the waiting list. Many people changed their mind when the tour was announced, and we got to go. At the same time, our family suffered a catastrophe, which made us question what was important in life. We decided to go on the tour. we learned so much, but we were different people. We gave empathy and sympathy to everybody on that tour. We understood how they felt. When we got to meet people that were actually abused during that time, we were in tears. When we came back, we had to tell all our family what we learned and what they needed to do. With election time coming right now, we attend every opportunity to meet candidates and ask them questions that we never would have asked before, because we want to know where they stand. We learned that life is more important than anything else, and we put ourselves in a different perspective. It was a marvelous tour. Thank you, Judy.
Thank you, Dale, for sharing your experience. And now, recorded, we have Margaret Kane.
Shabbat Shalom. I'm Margaret Kane, one of our civil rights pilgrims. I'm honored to share some reflections with you this evening, and I'm sorry that I could not be there in person. I love how our work and participation for this trip transcends time and place. Before we actually got on the plane to Atlanta, we all had the opportunity to consider what brought us on this trip. What is our personal story? How does that story influence our social justice work? And what do we hope to keep from the trip and our past to motivate personal and collective action in the community, specifically in our community? Using a technique called public narrative, I explored my story of self. What experiences have led me to be so deeply committed to civil rights since high school? And how might the trip build upon these experiences and inspire action? I found that this process ties to the Jewish value of Lador Vador because, as I reflected on my personal story of self, I learned that my commitment to social justice extends back generations. I remembered that one of my grandmothers was a Southern racist at her core, and the other was one of the first presidents of the Berkeley YWCA. Talk about contradictions. The California grandmother wrote eloquently about the need to serve the disadvantaged, especially women and children, and she truly lived a life of service throughout the first half of the 20th century. In her own way, my mom followed in her footsteps as a public school teacher for her entire career, an activist committed to raising up immigrant children in the Central Valley. Before our civil rights tour, I never thought about how my ancestors indirectly launched my social action activities as far back as I can remember. Reading with other students my own age in the inner city schools of Oakland in elementary school, and canvassing before the 1972 McGovern presidential bid. Without the civil rights trip and taking time to reflect on how my past connects to the present, I would not have understood my personal story in this unified way. I hold the stories of Joanne Bland, the youngest person to be apprehended and jailed as she marched across the Selma Bridge, and the bishop from Birmingham, who was one of King's chief strategists in that brutal city, in my mind and heart to remind me that our fight for civil rights transcends time and place. It's alive with the people we met. It's alive in the stories of my family, and it's alive in the work that many of us have done since returning to get out the vote in Kansas, Yahoo, and now to get out the vote in some key states throughout the country to defend our democracy. If you want to learn more about the public narrative and how to connect your story to our communities of action, speak to Judy during the ONEG. We've developed a mini program that we would love to share with you to support your own personal commitment to social action. Thank you for coming to our service tonight. Take care.
Well, Cantor, that sounded like a call.
That sounded like a call. I don't know how I can follow up with that.
So when we get called to do something, we stand. So please rise for the Baruch for the call to worship on page 146.
Baruch et Adonai hamevorach. Baruch Adonai hamevorach le'olam va'ed.
Please be seated.
Ma'ariv Aravim, the prayer to the one who mixes the twilight. I chose this prayer because I wanted to contemplate some events during the civil rights movement that happened at night. The Hebrew word ma'ariv contains the idea of mixing, and our tradition embraces the idea that more than one thing can be true at the same time. For enslaved people and later for people of the Great Migration leaving the Jim Crow South, twilight could mean the beginning of freedom, the time of escape. For the freedom riders who boarded buses, knowing they would probably spend the night in jail, being beaten or worse, twilight brought on a time of fear. And for Viola Liuzzo, a 39-year-old mother of 5, the evening of March 25th, 1965, brought her life to an end on a Selma Montgomery highway. She had driven down from Detroit and volunteered to drive marchers home in her Oldsmobile after the successful third march from Selma to Montgomery. A car full of KKK members chased her and fellow activist Leroy Moton for 20 miles before shooting her and leaving Moton for dead. Our bus driver pointed out the highway marker honoring Viola Liuzzo. Her murder was cited by President Johnson when he advocated for passage of the Voting Rights Act a few months later in August 1965. Twilight brought on freedom, terror, and death, and it also brought courage. When Martin Luther King and Ralph Abernathy spent nights in jail, they made a practice of fasting and praying, and they woke up at sunrise and prayed again. It is their strength and the strength of millions of ordinary people that I remember when saying the Ma'ariv prayer. Baruch atah Adonai, Ma'ariv Aravim.
Thank you, Anne. We continue with the Avad Olam on page 150.
Ahavat Olam Beit Yisrael Amcha ahavta Amcha ahavta Torah u'mitzvot Chukim u'mishpatim Otanu limadeta Otanu limadeta Al kein Adonai Eloheinu b'shachbenu uvkumenu nasiach bekukecha v'nizmach v'divrei Toratecha u'mitzvotecha le'olam va'ed ki chayenu ve'oreh yameinu להסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני אוהב עמו ישראל. אוהב עמו ישראל. אמן. שמע ישראל אדוני אלוהינו אדוני אחד. 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 ברוך שם כבוד מלכותו לעולם ועד. ברוך שם כבוד מלכותו לעולם ועד.
We continue together with the Ve'ahavta on page 154.
ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך. והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך, ודיברת בם, ושבתך בביתך, ובלכתך בדרך, ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובישעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אמת.
At times I found our trip depressing and disheartening to see man's inhumanity to man. We went through museums and monuments on slavery, lynching, and the fight for civil rights. To see how many unjust governments still exist in the world today, depicted on a huge wall map with a color-coded map of the world. Too little of the map showed fair governments that give their people basic human rights. I asked myself, what can we teach our children? And how do we have a hope for a better future for our children and grandchildren? The answer, to me, is right here in front of us. We are taught the world stands on three things: Torah, prayer, and acts of loving kindness. There are 613 commandments in the Torah telling us how to be decent human beings, to treat others kindly, to judge others fairly, to welcome strangers as we were once strangers in a strange new land, to pray for the sick, and to remember loved ones who have passed. The list goes on with mitzvot we can do. Our children learn by our example. They watch how we treat others. They can help collect donations of clothes and toys they have grown out of. They hear you on the phone asking a sick friend what you can do to help. They hear how you speak to people and how you speak about others. The pictures of strikers from the past carrying signs that said, "I am a man," reminded me of our signs on our streets today that say Black Lives Matter. It is time to speak up against injustices and to remember that we are all human, no matter our race, religion, or nationality, and should all be treated equally. This is how we make a better world for future generations.
We continue on page 157. Standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe what we were taught before ever we stood at Sinai's foot, that wherever we go, it is eternally Egypt, that there is a better place, a promised land, that the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness, that there is no way to get from here to there, except by joining hands, marching together.
And we're on page 158. And before we sing together, I'd like you to say a few words. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, who is like you, O God, among the gods who are worshipped? Jews the world over recognize this prayer, which celebrates God's power shown when the sea was parted, allowing the Israelites to finally escape from their bondage in Egypt. But this prayer does not only celebrate the history of our people. We say, Ze Eli anu v'amru, Adonai yimloch leolam va'ed. This is our God, they cried. Adonai will reign forever and ever. We look to the future when, facing hardship, we hope that we will also have the trust and the strength to step into the water, knowing that God is on our side. The history of African slaves in America is different from ours. After 244 years of slavery on our shores, President Lincoln proclaimed emancipation, which freed the slaves in the rebellious southern states. And then the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were ratified, abolishing slavery in all the states, establishing equal rights and protections, and the right to vote. But have these guarantees been realized in fact? At the time of the Civil War, there were 4 million African Americans in the South. When they were freed, they were hated and feared by the white population living amongst them. It's as if the Israelites were freed but never left Egypt. After a brief period of Reconstruction, Southern states passed more and more restrictive, racist laws that are collectively known as Jim Crow. But then, from 1910 to 1970, 6 million black people left the South. They were not led by a Moses, but were driven by a collective spirit of hope and anticipation that their lives would improve, that their freedom would be assured if they moved to the cities of the North. But they were not met with open arms. They were met with segregation, redlining, denial of loans, inferior schools, incarceration, and a resentful white majority. To this day, their search for true freedom is not over. When we pray, who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in splendor, working wonders, it is our hope that those wonders will be shared with all who are oppressed.
We continue on page 158 with the Mi Chamocha.
Kamokan Nedar Bakodesh Nora Tehilot Osei Fele Nora Tehilot Osei Fele. Won't you help me sing
These
songs of freedom? They're all I ever had. Redemption songs. Malchutecha ro'u vanecha bokei hayam lifnei Moshe u'Miriam. Ze'eli anu ve'ameru Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed. Won't you help me sing these songs of freedom? That's all I ever had. Redemption song, redemption song, redemption song.
ונאמר, כי פדה אדוני את יעקב, וגלו מיד חזק ממנו. ברוך אתה אדוני, גאל ישראל.
We continue on page 160.
Guide my steps and help me find my way. I need your shelter now. Rock me in your arms and guide my steps and help me make this day a song of praise to you. Rock me in your arms and guide my steps. Oh, guide my steps. And help me find my way. I need your shelter now. Rock me in your arms and guide my steps. And help me make this day a song of praise to you. Rock me in your arms and guide my steps. Rock me in your arms and guide my steps.
The name it's for students.
Now that's a call to worship.
We continue on page 162.
Well done.
ושמרו בני ישראל השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברי עולם. ושמרו בני ישראל השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברי עולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם, אותי לעולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברי עולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים והארץ. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברי עולם. וביום השביעי שבת ויהי נפש, שבת ויהי נפש, שבת Vayinafar v'shamru b'nei Yisrael et HaShabbat לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם.
Sit in the front row. I'm going to have you back up in a second. Just sit down, and you'll be back up in a second.
So, I'd like to talk to you about a very hot, uncomfortable day in Selma, Alabama. A city of empty storefronts, a tired-looking downtown, not very much charm. But we had come to learn about Bloody Sunday, March 7th, 1965, when John Lewis led a group of protesters across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in order to march to the state capitol in Montgomery to demonstrate for voting rights. They were barely halfway across the bridge when state troopers started clubbing them. Lewis was almost killed. But over the next couple of weeks, things changed. Martin Luther King entered the fray, and so did the Justice Department, assisted by a young hotshot lawyer named Brian Landsberg. Eventually, a federal judge ruled that the protesters had a constitutional right to march, and 2 weeks after Bloody Sunday, they set off again, crossing the bridge unimpeded, and reached Montgomery a few days later. So there we were in Selma, 57 years after the fact. We heard the story of Selma from a woman who lived through the experience in 1965 as a young girl. We learned about a prominent Jewish merchant who was aligned with the white power structure. The store is gone, but the family name still graces one of the tallest buildings in town. Finally, it was our turn to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And our crossing obviously wasn't as momentous an occasion as what happened in 1965. But still, as we took our first steps, crossing this nondescript bridge named for a Confederate general, something came over me. As Judy said, this was hallowed ground. I wouldn't call it a religious experience, but it was a powerful feeling. There was something in the air that morning in Selma, Alabama, something besides the humidity, and it stuck with me ever since.
Dale, have you ever thought about riding professionally? I'd like to invite the B'nai Mitzvah students to join us on the bima once again, and invite everyone to please rise as we continue with the tefillah on page 164.
Adonai sefatai tiftachu fi agitei latecha. Adonai, open my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avoteinu v'imotenu. Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarai, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, הכל, וזוכר חסדי אבות באימהות, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה, מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן. ברוך אתה, אדוני, מגן אברהם בעזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני,
מחיי הכל אתה רב להושיע, מוריד הטעם, מקלקל חיים בחסד, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר, מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומי דומה לך, מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה להחיות הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי הכל. אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יהללוך סלה. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש.
We continue praying privately from page 172 through 180, standing or sitting as is your custom.
Just be. Go inside your heart and see what it wants, what it needs, what it yearns when you breathe. Go inside your heart and see. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be kind, be true, be true. May acceptable to you, oh my rock and my redeemer. Yehi l'raso nimrei fi v'hegion libi. Yehi l'raso nimrei fi v'hegion libi lefanecha.
We take time in every service to pray for those who are in need of healing, healing of body or healing of spirit. But it's not enough for us to pray. The prayer itself is a reminder to us that we should also act. There are people in our lives, or people in our midst who are suffering, either physically or spiritually or emotionally. It's our job to do more than pray, but to also provide comfort and support. So if there's people in your life who need healing of body or healing of spirit, please take time between this Shabbat and next to reach out to them, offer words of comfort, or simply be with them if that's all that they can handle at the moment. We continue together on page 371.
Mi sheberach avoteinu Abraham, Yitzchak veYaakov. Mi sheberach imotenu Sarah, Rivka, Leah, v'Rachel. May the one who blessed our mothers, may the one who blessed our fathers, hear our prayer.
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 And
Bless us as well. Bless us with the power of your healing. Bless us with the power of your hope. May our hearts be filled with understanding and strengthened by the power of your love. Bless us with a vision for tomorrow. Help us to reach out to those in pain. May the warmth of friendship ease our sorrow. Give us courage, give us faith, show us the way. Mi sheberach avotenu, Mi sheberach imotenu.
hear our prayer.
Hear our prayer. Hear our prayer. Hear our prayer. Hear our prayer. Hear our prayer. Hear our prayer. Hear our prayer. Hear our prayer. Bless us as well.
Shabbat Shalom. At the National Center for Civil and Human Rights in Atlanta, there is a lunch counter with 4 stools set as if in a drugstore in the 1960s. When we visited, the museum docent handed each of us a set of headphones while we waited in line. She explained that when we put our hands on the counter, we would hear taunts like those launched at the lunch counter protesters, and that the stool would even shake. It would be as if we could feel those threatening us brushing past. The docent warned us with sweet concern that it might be upsetting. An African-American docent kindly warning me as a white person about how upsetting the taunts hurled at largely African-American protesters could be. On the museum's website, you can hear the threats we heard at the museum. We included a link on the flyer of resources. I hope you will go home and play it. close your eyes and listen. For less than 90 seconds, hear what nonviolent protesters had to endure when they sat at white-only lunch counters in the South, daring to assert that whites and blacks should be able to drink a milkshake side by side, daring to challenge the racial caste system of the South. It was as jarring as the docent had warned us to hear the hatred, have a small sense of the violence the protesters endured. Experiences like this were the power of the trip for me. We stood where civil rights protesters were beaten for marching for the right to vote, and met Ms. Joanne Bland, who several of us have mentioned, who was at the Edmund Pettus Bridge on Bloody Sunday when she was only 11, and she told us about what she experienced. We stood on a bus watching a projected reenactment of Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat, starting the Montgomery bus boycott. We went to the motel where Dr. King was shot, as well as the room across the street where his assassins lay in wait and fired the fateful shots. I think part of why we still have so much racial inequity in the United States is our unwillingness to confront the pain of what our country has done to people of color. It is hard to open our hearts to that pain, to let in the reality of what enslaved people experienced, confront the cruelty and economic pain of Jim Crow rules, and see the ongoing housing segregation and fewer educational and career opportunities people of color still have. That cruelty and suffering was caused by our country's racially discriminatory governmental policies, explicit governmental policies, as well as discrimination by individuals. How can we make sense of the discrimination, mistreatment, violence, and the ongoing impacts? We went to the lynching memorial in Montgomery, Alabama. Rabbi Alfie talked about it at her Yom Kippur sermon. That's where my heart broke the most, where I did my hardest crying, even before we got to the tablets with the names of those who were lynched. At the beginning of the memorial, there are sculptures of enslaved people being brought to the Americas. Looking at those sculptures, I confronted the arc of violence white people perpetrated on black people in the United States: kidnapping, enslaving, forced labor, rape, separation of families. After the 13th Amendment outlawed slavery, except for punishment for crime, the tools of violence against blacks morphed to lynching, police brutality, and mass incarceration. The lynching memorial rightly started with images of enslavement, and those images opened my heart to what the enslaved people endured. A woman in chains giving birth. How could it be? I let in the reality of some of the violence, inhumanity, terror, and pain inflicted on African Americans in our country. I was struck by the messaging at the museum reminding us of the impact on blacks and also on whites and the soul of our country, and I just want to read one of the signs. The sign reads, "Lynchings in America were not isolated hate crimes committed by rogue vigilantes. Lynchings were targeted racial violence perpetrated to uphold an unjust social order. Lynchings were terrorism." This era left thousands dead, significantly marginalized black people politically, financially, and socially, and inflicted deep trauma on the entire African American community. White people who witnessed, participated in, and socialized their children in a culture that tolerated gruesome lynchings were also psychologically damaged. State officials' tolerance of lynching created enduring national and institutional wounds that have not yet healed. Lynchings occurred in communities where African Americans still today remain marginalized, disproportionately poor, overrepresented in prisons and jails, and underrepresented in decision-making roles in the criminal justice system. We believe that telling the truth about the age of racial terror and reflecting together on this period and its legacy can lead to a more thoughtful and informed commitment to justice today. I spent a long time looking at that sign. Yes, lynchings were terrorism, impacting not only the particular victims and their families, but delivering a clear message about who was in power And what happened to blacks who dared to challenge that power by registering to vote, expecting a good education, even looking at a white person the wrong way? And that reign of terror did cause psychological harm to whites and to our nation. Terror and harm we still have not adequately confronted. Learning that story, confronting it, can help us move toward a more just world. If it sounds like the trip was intense, it was. But luckily, there were also moments of lightness and joy, as well as opportunities to connect with one another. And wow, all of that was really, really important. At the end of our intense second day, we had dinner in groups. I ate at the Mellow Mushroom in Montgomery, Alabama, with my husband, Gordon, my sister, Rachel, Naomi Feldman, who we are sending healing prayers to tonight, and Adar Cohen, who we saw in the video. We each talked about what had moved us that day. Rachel talked about the reenactment of the lunch counter protests and how upsetting it had been. It was so good to unwind and process with others, and also to laugh and have fun. The waiters were outgoing and fun. I was pleasantly surprised by our waiter Jacob's gender nonconforming presentation, which was a check on my assumptions about the South and prompted me to text my eldest, who is also a gender nonconforming Jacob. I was touched by everyone's open-hearted sharing, and it felt good to connect about our experiences. I admired 90-year-old Naomi's energy and determination, and I loved connecting with Adar from Israel and his intense interest in the U.S. civil rights movement. So yes, it's important to open our hearts to the pain of the past and the present, but also to connect with others about it. I firmly believe that a foundational first step to greater racial equity is acknowledging and understanding and experiencing our past. Judaism knows this and teaches us this. At the Passover Seder, we are told to think of what the Israelite slaves went through as if we ourselves were slaves. On Shavuot, when we commemorate getting the Ten Commandments, we are taught that we are there ourselves to receive them, and we relive that moment. And Sukkot, which we're celebrating now, is the quintessential experiential holiday. We make impermanent huts where we are to eat and sleep, where we are to eat our meals and sleep. We are to give up the material comfort of our homes to remember what it was to wander in the desert for 40 years. Not just to read about it, but to inhabit that experience. That's what the experiential exhibits of the museums did for me, open my heart to more personally connect with our country's legacy. The purpose of the trip was talked about from day one, to learn and experience, to inspire us and enable us to do. The trip was structured to give us time to process and journal, to sing and dance and cry, to experience it all. There is no magical solution to solving racial inequity in our country, but we can and we must each do our part. We have a wonderful racial justice committee here at B'nai Israel, and we welcome your participation. We're educating ourselves about racial inequity in the past and the present, learning with our community, both adults and youth, and we're connecting with the larger community in Sacramento. I believe that those of us who are white need to listen to people of color about what they need, and each of us can make a difference in our own sphere. I started a racial equity team at my department and applied for us to participate in a racial equity learning collaborative, which has been a great experience. At the beginning of each learning session, the facilitators go over the group agreements and remind us that dismantling institutional racism isn't going to be finished in our lifetime. It's forever work, but we each have to do our part. On the flyer of resources, you can find many examples of actions each of us can take to advance racial equity in our community. On the last day of the trip, at lunch, Rabbi Alfie had us sing, Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, which means, it is not your duty to complete the work, but neither are you free to desist from it. Cantor Steinberg sang it to us on Kol Nidre. We hope you will join me and Emma in singing it tonight. The lyrics are on page 645. Ready? I'm ready until you are. Lo alecha hamlecha ligmor, Shabbat Shalom.
It is my pleasure to invite up Josh Masternardi, the president of our congregation, for some Shabbat greetings.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you, Rabbi Cantor and Michael, for a wonderful service. Mazel Tov to Brooklyn and your family on your bat mitzvah. And I want to thank everyone who went on and shared your experiences from the Civil Rights Tour. I'm kind of humbled to follow your inspiring words with much more mundane words of goings-on. Tonight after services, we have the Oneg in the courtyard, sponsored by the B'nai Mitzvah families. Please join us for that. Tomorrow morning, Torah study at 9:30. At 10:30 a.m. is the Bat Mitzvah of Brooklyn Stein. Sunday, we have a lot going on. Yisker for Sukkot is at 10 a.m. Kulanu, our religious school, is not in the morning on Sunday. Instead, join us all. Everybody should join us at 5 o'clock for the Simchat Torah celebration out on 11th Avenue, which includes dinner together. You can bring a picnic. The confirmation class is selling pizza and drinks. You can pre-purchase online. I did that last time. It was really convenient. There'll be a game of, let me see if I can say this right, Mishpacha Machloket, which we might also call Family Feud, with a host of famous CBI people that you'll have to come to see or read in the Hadashot, followed by the unrolling and the dancing with the Torahs and live music from the Klezmer Cats. On next Thursday, there's next Thursday, October 20th, we have a guest speaker, Daniel Sokach, author of a book about Israel. It was sponsored by the Lifelong Learning Israel Committee and J Street West Coast, and the Israel Peace Alternatives Group from Beit Havarim. And then when I was looking through the Hadashot, which you should also do, there's a lot of good stuff in there. One thing came to note. On Thursday, October 27th, Rabbi Stacy Peterson is going to be leading an in-person Rosh Chodesh on, and this is the part that caught my eye, Dangerous Women of the Talmud. So it's worth checking that out. And now I'd like to ask Brooklyn if you'd like to introduce your family.
Can my family please stand? And anyone? This is my brother Miles. This is my mom, Allison. This is my brother Kyle. This is my dad, Jonathan. This is my grandpa, Jeff. This is my grandma, Sunny. This is my aunt, Rebecca. This is my uncle, Joe. And these are my cousins, Alexa and Isaac.
Welcome to everyone. I also wanted to give a special welcome to a group of students from Christian Brothers who we're very glad you were able to join us tonight. If you have any questions for anybody, please, really anybody here, you can ask at the Oneg. I'd also like to ask the Board of Trustees, past presidents, and committee chairs to stand and introduce yourselves.
Hi, Judy Hyman from the Board of Trustees and Racial Justice Committee.
Hi, my name is Steve Orkand. I'm a past president.
Dale Kassler, also past president.
Ryan Landsberg, Chair of Religious Practices, Co-Chair of Religious Practices.
I'm Nita Davidson. I coordinate the Shamasim.
I'm Judy Emick Leatherwood. I'm chair of the music committee and choir wrangler. And just a date to remember, December 7th, it's a Wednesday at 7:30. There's a wonderful band, There's a wonderful band coming from the East Coast. It's called Nefesh Mountain. I keep wanting to say something else. They're a wonderful combination of Jewish music and folk music and jazz and bluegrass, and they make it work. If for no other reason, isn't that interesting? If for no other reason. Yeah, Contact Federation, December 7th.
I'm Michael Hersher. I'm chair of the Lifelong Learning Committee.
Thank you, everybody. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Josh. And it's my pleasure to invite up the B'nai Mitzvah students who are with us once again to do us the honor of helping lead us in the Aleinu. Some of the words are on the page, on page 586. Some of them are not.
I think we have the words. Do we have the words?
We have the words?
We've got the words.
The words
They're
are
up on the
behind
wall.
us.
It's up to us to call ourselves to task, to sing what's good and true, to bring about redemption. It's what we were freed to do. For what's the point of being here if we're not moved to change our ways? Aleinu leshabeach. It's time to live our praise. We are carrying the stories of the ones who came before. What stories will be told of us when we are here no more? We commit ourselves to action. It brings meaning to our days. Aleinu leshabeach. It's time to live our praise. It's up to us to own the vision. We are an answer to a call. It's up to us to live the words we speak for the benefit of all. It's up to us to bow down deeply. There's a broken world to raise. Aleinu leshabeach. It's time to live our praise. Aleinu leshabeach. It's time to live our praise. V'ne'emar v'haya Adonai l'melech al kol ha'aretz bayom hahu yeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad.
Please be seated.
I'm going to continue a little bit about the lynching memorial and kind of tag on to what Elizabeth said. As you're walking up this path, you come to the top and you see these large, huge, rectangular coffins hanging. And there are counties on each one by state with the names of the people who are lynched. And as you're walking through this memorial, they're rising because you're actually going downhill. But it feels like you're watching the lynching rise. And at the end of the memorial, there's a plaque. For the hanged and beaten, for the shot, drowned, and burned, for the tortured, tormented, and terrorized, for those abandoned by the rule of law, we will remember. With hope, because hopelessness is the enemy of justice. With courage, because peace requires bravery. With persistence, because justice is a constant struggle. With faith, because we shall overcome.
Our hearts are with those who have lost loved ones, and it is with sadness that we recall the recent passing of Homer Shannon, the beloved brother of Barbara Shannon Tincher and beloved brother-in-law of Stephen Tincher. Zichrono livracha. May his memory forever be a blessing. We also recall loved ones who have passed away at this time in years past. We remember Joan Adler, William Davis, Flora Drillings, Rebecca Edel, Emma Elephant, J. Irving Emick, Nathan Foreman, Eugene Foxman, Helen Gabal, Gary Gilbert, Clara Gluck, Goldie Goldsmith, Rena Goodman, Harry Green, Della Grossman, Jacob Hahn, William Zeff Herman, Mitzi Hornick, Karen Isaacson, Norbert Jacobs, Carol Kaplan, Jim Karnofsky, Donald Lindo, Edward Lippman, Morris London, Jacqueline Martin, Michael Meslowski, Abraham Matisoff, Rose Mendel, Jenny Merksimer, Melvin Morse, Irving Moskowitz, Sheila Mudrick, Mildred Nelson, Elaine O'Malley, bless you, Charlie Rominger, George Rosenthal, Molly Silverman, Joyce Siskin, Mary Slavitt, Clayton Solomon, Doris Sparsman, George Spencer, Martha Stern, Robert Turner, Irma Warhaftig, Cecil Warwick, Israel Wineapple, Marvin Weinreb, Shirley Weinreb, and Julia Winkle. We also hold in our hearts on this Shabbat in particular all those whose lives were taken unjustly for the simple sin of being themselves. If there are any names that anyone would like to add to the Kaddish list tonight, please feel free to call those names aloud as my gaze meets yours.
Sylvia Behrman.
I would like to ask those who are saying Kaddish for a loved one to please stand. And if the congregation can please join me in these words of comfort. Hamakom yenechem etchem betok sha'ar of Leitzion v'Yushalayim. May God comfort you among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. We all rise to provide comfort to those who grieve as we continue together with the Mourner's Kaddish on page 598. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah, ve'alma divrah hirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chaye chon of yomei of chaye dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'yizman kariv v'imru, Amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam umei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitraman v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shemei tekudsha barichu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbachata v'nechemata, damiran be'alma v'imru, Amen. Yehi shlama Rabbah min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru, Amen. Osei shalom v'imramav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al yoshvei tevel.
Amen.
May the source of peace and peace to all who mourn and comfort to all who grieve, and let us say, Amen. Please be seated. I'd like to invite up all the participants who joined us on the civil rights journey to please join us on the bima.
There are sound sheets.
sorry.
And Ryan's going to project the lyrics.
Okay. Please join us in the closing song.
We really were on a bus, and we didn't sing enough on the bus, but we sang a little bit on the bus. And this is one of the songs we sang. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Let it shine, oh yeah. Here in Sacramento, we're gonna let it shine. Here in Sacramento, we're gonna let it shine. Here in Sacramento, we're gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, oh yeah. We can each make a difference. We're gonna let it shine. We can each make a difference. We're gonna let it shine. We can each make a difference. We're gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Black lives matter everywhere. We're gonna let it shine. Black lives matter everywhere. We're gonna let it shine. Black lives matter everywhere. We're gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Spreading love around the world. We're gonna let it shine. Spreading love around the world. We're gonna let it shine. Spreading love around the world. We're gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine.
Thank you, guys. Wait, so I have one more thing to say before you sit down. Now, I'm going to let you in on a secret. Pretty much every Reform rabbi in the United States secretly wants to be a Black Baptist minister. Because we have a weird thing. In the Reform synagogue, if people are into what they're saying, you know what they do in response?
Amen.
No, not in a Reform synagogue. In a Reform synagogue, they're quiet if they like what you're saying, which is really hard. But when we were in Birmingham, was he in his 90s? The pastor who met with us in Birmingham had more energy in his 90s than I have ever had in my life combined. And I think if he was here, what he would say to all of you is, woo! They're much better at keeping their congregations awake than I am. So thank you all for such a moving service. And I hope that people are not shy about talking with people who went on the trip. Ask them about what it was like and how you could be involved in this committee and this part of our congregation going forward as well. Thank you all. We conclude the service with the Kiddush and the Motzi. The prayer for the Kiddush can be found on page 123.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotov v'ratzavanu v'shabbat kodsho Be'ahava uvratzon hinchin lanu Zikaron lema'aseh bereishit Ki hu yom techila lemikra kodesh Zecher letziat mitzrayim Ki vanu vakarta Ve'otanu kidashta mikol ha'amim Ve'shabbat kodshecha be'ahava uvratzon hinchaltanu Baruch atah Adonai Mekadesh HaShabbat. Amen. L'chaim. U'l'shalom. It's yours. Yeah. You're drinking it. Ooh, ah.
You don't like Manischewitz? Oh. Is it Manischewitz? Oh, it's the good stuff. It's not even Manischewitz.
I think she might have preferred Manischewitz, but you got the good stuff, girl.
Jonathan, if that was meant to keep her from drinking throughout high school, well done.
I think
Very well
it
done.
worked. Yes.
For those of you who haven't been with us on a Friday night, this challah is not the one we're eating because we're touching it. And so since COVID has happened, we have a different challah that you will actually be invited to eat out at the Oneg with all sorts of other lovely treats out there. And that one has not been touched by the entire clergy staff. Also, since it is Sukkot, the sukkah is also there if you want to enjoy the Oneg inside the sukkah. You can touch it.
You ready? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. Shabbat shalom. The Tevon.
Please join us in the courtyard.